Hello, everybody. Let me just kick this off by saying how wonderful it feels to be able to play Dragon Quest again for this channel, even if that game is Dragon Quest VI. Not exactly one of the higher regarded entries in the series. If you look up any ranking or any list of the Dragon Quest games, 6 is inevitably going to be at or near the bottom. And I really do think that that is more of a testament to how strong the Dragon Quest series is as a whole, as opposed to a referendum on how supposedly bad this game is. Because it really isn't. I think, at the end of the day, all Dragon Quest VI really suffers from is that it just doesn't have a singular thing that really makes it stand out. The first 4 entries in Dragon Quest series were all revolutionary in some way towards like advancing the JRPG genre. And then 5 comes along and it tells one of the best stories ever told in a video game. And then 6 just kind of doesn't really have any of that. It also doesn't help that it's a little brother game. A lot of the things that 6 would try to do, 7 would 5 years later, 6 years later, however long it took for 7 to get made. I know that was an infamously long development cycle. Anyway, that game did a lot of concepts and this one better. So, present day, 6 just kind of gets overshadowed. But it's still a really good game. In Homer's Odyssey, Odysseus and his men are at sea when a storm blew their ship off course to the island of the Lotus Eaters. They all eat this plant that, when ingested, it creates this sense of euphoria and bliss. Odysseus and his men ate the plant and forgot about their past, lost sight of their future, and lost all ambition of returning home. All who ate the lotus want nothing more than to stay on this island, forever remaining in a state of apathetic indulgence. Recognizing that they've succumbed to the allure of never-ending pleasure, Odysseus stops eating these plants, forcibly drags his men back onto the ship, and despite a near revolt, they continued on their way back to Ithaca. In Dragon Quest VI, Mudo, the Dark Lord, before fighting him, he doesn't gloat. He doesn't go, "I'm going to take over the world." Well, wait, I mean, his fake counterpart does, but I'll get into that. The real Mudo says, "Let me show you how harsh reality can be." Oh, and this is a quarter of the way through the game, by the way. And this isn't like a fake demon lord. This is the guy. This is the main antagonist of Dragon Quest VI, and you kill him permanently 15 hours into a 46-hour game, which is exactly what I complained about in Phantasy Star 4, but here I think they did a much better job of filling in what happens next. Eventually anyway, because it is weird immediately after. The king tells you Mudo may have been defeated, but other evils still plague the world, which, fair enough, I guess there's always evil in the world, but at some point you're just kind of hunting ghosts. This leads into the directionless part of the game, where you don't really know what you're doing or where you're supposed to be going, until you realize that Dragon Quest VI isn't a game about defeating the Dark Lord, it's a game about not eating the lotus plants. Dragon Quest VI's gimmick is that it's made up of 2 worlds. You can think of it sort of like A Link to the Past, only they're a lot more similar. There's the real world, which should be self-explanatory, and the dream world. There's no concrete rules as to how these places interact. Sometimes doing something in the dream world results in something happening in the real world. Sometimes the dream world consists of a dead man's memories. Other times it's a one-to-one replica of a real-world location. They're loosely connected, much like a real dream is to a reality. What is concrete, though, is that every NPC in the real world has a counterpart in the dream world. Take this old man, for instance. In the dream world, he's pulling a Boogie 2988 and has this hot, I guess hot for Dragon Quest VI standards, young woman as a companion, but in reality, he just says that he's lonely. NPCs and characters in the dream world are idealized representations of themselves. Of course, since this is a Super Nintendo game, it doesn't normally go much further than that old man I just used as an example, and we've seen dual reality stuff like this before, but the twist in Dragon Quest VI is that you, the player character, the one you move around, is the fake. You are the phony, idealized version of yourself, and your mission after defeating the Demon Lord is to go find yourself so you can stop eating the lotus plants. It's a thinly veiled metaphor for self-discovery, facing your responsibilities, and whatnot. But I'm a sucker for a good parable, and the overarching concept behind this game I enjoyed quite a bit. There's way more to it than I remembered. You spend the first few hours in the dream world, but you don't know it's the dream world. Your tiny village up in the hills hosts a yearly ceremony to celebrate the mountain gods, and to another year of peace. For every ceremony, they buy this crown off this craftsman who lives in the nearest city. They entrust you with the village's goods, so you can go to said city. It's this weird place with like a dozen different shopkeepers, each attempting to rip you off. Gives off a carnival-like vibe. You can actually shop around and sell your goods for different prices too, but when you go to buy the crown, its craftsman isn't home. He headed west to find the materials to make this thing with, so you go west to follow him, only to find this giant hole in the world and a man hanging for his life. You help him up, but fall in instead, only to reappear someplace which isn't on your map. You're half transparent, and you can't interact with any of the townspeople. Only after ingesting the dream-seeing drops do you become real. Or do you? You become a physical dream. These giant holes in the dream world is how we cross over to the other side. I love the setup, but at the end of the day, a Dragon Quest game is mostly a series of self-contained vignettes, and I wish I had as nice of things to say about those, but I found most of them forgettable. Mostly standard stuff anyway, such as legends state that in a cave nearby there's this ultimate weapon, but sadly the only guy who knows where the cave is has been dead for 50 years, so then you go to the dream world where he's conveniently still alive and to learn about the cave, to get the thing, yada yada yada, whatever, blah blah blah. Back to the main plot. In Mudo's castle, we're in this elegant room with a royal red rug, and blam, you're face to face with a statue of one of your party members. And this was before any of that Dream World 2 selves stuff was explained to the player either. So you're thinking, what? What's going on here? Fucking encounters. You couldn't have turned them off for this one room? Especially since it interrupts a cutscene. The encounter rate is a little high. Not too bad, but enough that it annoyed me more than a few times. And this game's difficulty in general was higher than I expected. Dragon Quest VI sort of kicked my ass, especially in the beginning before you gain any additional party members. The village elder in your hometown gives you the village goods to trade for a crown, but fuck that, man. I'm getting my ass kicked. I need equipment. So I sold the goods and bought some. You start off so weak. Random encounters right outside the first town killed me probably half a dozen times before I even reached this city. Like, look here, it's 6-on-1. Some games change the number of enemies you can potentially encounter based on the number of party members you have. Like, if you're at the beginning of the game and it's still a solo adventure, then you wouldn't be able to run into more than 2 at a time, but there's no such safety net here. And throughout the whole game, grinding was almost a constant presence. In order to beat Mudo, I ground for about 2 hours. I ground at the beginning just so I could survive, and I ground again after unlocking the job system. I ground after getting to the Dark World, and I ground again to beat the final boss. Oh yeah, there's a Dark World too, just like, you know, Dragon Quests 3, 4, and 5, aka where the end of the game happens. This sort of became a Dragon Quest tradition for a while, didn't it? Anyway, this game was a real kick in the balls, when I didn't expect it to be. This is a Dragon Quest game, after all. One about dreams at that. I should be sleepwalking right through it, right? I think in terms of what I'd consider to be mainstream Super Nintendo RPGs, the Final Fantasy series, Chrono Trigger, Earthbound, Secret of Mana, Dragon Quest, this has to be the most difficult one out of all of them. Not in terms of every RPG on the system, but out of the ones that come from a big name series, you know. If I were to say their names to an average gamer, they would at least know what I'm talking about. Your walking speed is noticeably higher than it was in 5, which is why the encounter rate seems a little higher than it should. I'll bet you get into the same amount of encounters per step as in 5, but since you're moving faster, it just seems like they happen way more often. Now, I'm not going to complain about increased walking speed. It comes in handy, especially in towns. Hell, even if you do get into more encounters in the overworld and in dungeons, it's still better than walking slowly, I suppose. But at times it felt like I was getting into fights every few seconds, and that's something that you notice, even if you don't notice that it's only because you're moving faster. I mentioned a job system earlier. They brought it back after it not being in 4 or 5, but you have to unlock it first. After defeating Mudo, remember that hole in the world you fell into saving that guy? Well, that hole isn't there anymore, and in its place is a shrine with another guy who changes your vocation. It's sort of a job system light. You don't unlock them until 15 hours into the game, and they don't change your appearance, they don't affect what equipment you're able to use, and you're able to switch between them with no repercussions whatsoever. All they really do is alter your character's stats and what abilities they end up learning. They brought back goof-offs though, which is something I love about the fan translation I played. This game didn't come out in America, obviously, so when translating, they could either use modern Dragon Quest conventions and names, they could have just used the ones from the DS translation, or they could have tried to emulate what an official localization might have looked like had it happened in 1995. Now, I'm willing to bet that this translation actually is older than the DS version, so that probably wasn't an option, but regardless of how we got here, I appreciate that they went the route of trying to emulate what a localization might have been in 1995, i.e. using the same names as the English NES versions and not whatever a modern Dragon Quest might call things. For example, whenever that Dragon Quest III remake comes out, that's still happening, right? Square Enix hasn't said a word in years, so who knows? But assuming that eventually comes out, this class, the goof-offs, they're going to be called gadabouts? Now what the hell is a gadabout? Give me goof-offs, damn it. In practice, this job system ends up functioning more like Final Fantasy VI's Magicite, in that it's mostly used to give your characters whichever specific spells and abilities you want them to have, than they are true classes like you would see in Final Fantasy V. Other than that, the battles themselves, well, they're Dragon Quest battles. If it ain't broke, it's the exact same system they used in 11, which came out 6 years ago now, geez. Basic as basic can be, but of course I wouldn't expect anything else. Equip your weapons. Wait, this is literally the last new town you gain access to before the Dark World. Why is there a tutorial NPC here? Ah, charade you are. Remember how there's 2 counterparts to every NPC? Well, that entire first city where you sell your crown doesn't exist in the real world. Instead, its inhabitants populate this shithole town trope. Think Zozo in Final Fantasy VI or Pickham in Dragon Quest VIII. A shanty town with crooks, hooks, weird unplanned construction that looks like it was set up in a first come, first serve manner. Suddenly those pushy shopkeepers in that dream town make a whole lot more sense. That lady who yells at you for entering her house takes on a whole new meaning in this different environment, especially after you learn about her backstory. Remember that guy who we helped out of that giant hole? In reality, he fucking died, and that was her father, and he happens to be a blacksmith that you need to fix your legendary sword. It's got some layers, man, and this is a fantastic setup, then pay off much later on. It's incredibly funny to find out that this tutorial NPC is just some drunk guy talking nonsense in a bar. Eventually you make your way back to the village the game began in, only the real world version this time. And shh, there he is. He doesn't notice us yet. Can I move? Can I try and catch up to him? Game? Oh god dang it! Stupid encounters. Man, he's gone. When you finally meet yourself, he's everything that you are not. Mainly a coward that gets bullied by this loser who's trying to date your sister. Your character's journey happened opposite to this. In your world, you went from this nameless slob in some random mountain village all the way to Reddick Castle, where you bravely enlisted into its army to help fight Mudo, which led to a series of adventures where you actually end up defeating him in both worlds. Your real self, on the other hand, a Prince of Reddick, where you mistakenly were called a prince earlier, but were found out because you didn't know the names of anybody there. I don't understand why the names of the characters are different in the real world as the dream world, but they were, so whatever. When the king and queen fall ill, and it looks like he might need to assume the throne, instead of doing that, he ran away. With the responsibility staring him in the face, he backed down. When you first meet up, and want to fuse with him, which is why you've been looking for him this whole time, so you can fuse to become one super being, he's scared of joining with you, because he doesn't know what'll happen. This is approximately 80% of the way through the game. By this point, you're a battle-hardened warrior, but the real you is just running away from everything, getting picked on by this guy who was an afterthought in your world. Then the village gets attacked, your doppelganger cowers inside, while you defeat all the monsters. This lady's hilarious, by the way. The townsfolk are in a panic, and she's stuck behind the bar. It's awesome. There is no escape. After this commotion, you're finally able to fuse the two halves of yourself together, which only results in you learning the zap spell, which isn't even good. Single target electric attack, when you can learn a multi-target version of the same spell with the Sage job class. Yeah, that's very lame. Alright, so we've defeated the Dark Lord. We've found ourselves. What now? Well, throughout your adventures, there was once a great kingdom who learned of this sealed away, super powerful being, and the king of this great land decided it would be a chipper idea to summon it so he could control said power. The kingdom succeeded in summoning it, but were unable to control it, so of course it ends up going berserk and destroying everything. Wait a second, this is the Zeal storyline from Chrono Trigger. They just borrowed it for a bit, I guess. That's who ends up being our end boss, some evil spirit this kingdom unleashed upon the world halfway through the game, which is fine, but it's a little disjointed. Like, it feels like it came from nowhere. It's not even built up aside from this one small segment of the game, even. You don't spend a lot of time in this castle, anyway. And speaking of Zeal from Chrono Trigger, Dragon Quest VI also tries to do the whole mystical town thing. You know, a whole village whose gimmick is that everyone is a magic user of some kind. In Final Fantasy VI or Chrono Trigger, and this is the last time I'm going to compare it to those, I swear, but Dragon Quest VI did come after, so fair is fair. In those games, they went to great lengths to establish how using magic is this rare and remarkable ability. Even in something like Final Fantasy II, their magic village is poignant for other character-related reasons. But here, the mysticism doesn't quite work because everyone knows how to use magic in the world of Dragon Quest. So why should I care? It's not special. This is like how every town or city thinks it's unique because they have a lake or some other body of water. When no, most places have that. You're not special. What most games don't have, however, is a Pokemon Generation 3-esque contest mini-game, complete with a runway, judges, and a spotlight. See, in addition to attack and defense, every piece of equipment also affects your style rating. And they really shove this in your face, too. It made me think that your style stat would affect luck or some other behind-the-scenes battle element. But no, the style stat is literally just for this dumb bullcrap that nobody would ever do if it wasn't for the fact that you actually need to win 3 of these contests to progress with the game. Imagine if in Pokemon, whenever they introduced the contests or whatever insert dumb thing they added this time, they forced you to win it 3 times before you could move on with the game. It's just as stupid as it sounds, and it happens like 2/3 of the way through, too, right when shit's getting serious. How did everyone get here anyway? I literally had to encase my ship inside of a bubble with the mermaid's harp, so I could go underwater, then come up inside of these mountains, just so I could come to this lone building in the middle of nowhere to take part in these contests. Does everybody live here? Like in this one room? It's the only building in this whole town. Anyway, yeah, you go underwater in this game too. I guess that contests weren't the only thing Pokemon Generation 3 ripped off. Believe it or not, this was the first Dragon Quest game with a bag for you to put your excess items in, essentially giving you an unlimited inventory, which is great for ease of play reasons, but as a result, they went a little key item happy. Literally, you get 3 different master keys. There's also the aforementioned mermaid harp, the magic carpet, 2 separate passes allowing you into different towns. The world map is an item, the Mirror of Ra, the Orb of Truth, the Reins of Pegasus, the Royal Letter, the Rusted Pipe, the Sand Container, and each small medal, renamed to mini medals in modern Dragon Quest, is its own item. Yeah, they went a little item crazy here. Is all this coming across as too negative? Ultimately, most of my complaints with this game are nitpicks. My only real one is that I wish the entirety of its concept was as strong as the dual reality one. I think it's an incredibly cool setup, with some moments that are really well executed, but it doesn't quite go that extra step into telling an interesting tale with those elements. I enjoyed Dragon Quest VI a lot. It was 32 in my top 100 Super Nintendo games list, and if I had to re-rank, it would probably be a little bit higher. Not top 10, but teens, early 20s range. I will say that the entire Dark World, or last 15-ish% of the game was very well done, even if the villain itself kind of came out of nowhere and isn't really all that memorable in the grand scheme of things. I wouldn't recommend this game to anyone who's never touched Dragon Quest before, but if you've avoided it because you heard that it sucked, I'm here to tell you that it does not in fact suck and you should give it a chance. That is, if you feel like it. Anyway, that's all I got. Shout out to the patrons. Shout out to William Robert Lee. Front Mission of the non-gun hazard variety will be the next episode. In the meantime, I'll have some other stuff I'm gonna upload. I have some ideas for some quicker videos I can do, so hopefully it won't take me another month to upload. Never trust anyone who needs a haircut. Goodbye.